Chapter 3. Footprints of a Refugee. After setting foot on the U.S. Navy ship of the 7th Fleet, USS Kirk, Nguyen reunited with his wife and children. Everyone was safe, which gave him peace of mind. Someone brought him a pack of cigarettes, saying it was sent by a Vietnamese brigadier general. Thanks to the stimulating effect of the cigarette, Nguyen became fully alert again. It was then that he started to pay attention and walk around the ship to observe. The distant shore of Vietnam was now just a faint and distant blur on the horizon. He tried to look towards it, but even he did not know why. Nguyen encountered a few Air Force officers, such as Lieutenant Colonel L., commander of the 251st Squadron. Nguyen did not know when he had arrived, but he noticed the lieutenant colonel was well dressed and seemed very relaxed, cheerfully chatting with those around him as if nothing had happened. The sun had set on the other side of the water, and the sea began to sparkle, reflecting the stars that appeared earlier than usual. Nguyen's wife had put the children to sleep in one place while he remained huddled in his shorts, wearing a yellow nylon raincoat like a firefighter. Nguyen found a quiet spot on the ship's deck. Resting his chin on the railing, he gazed out at the ocean. The tropical night sea breeze made him feel very comfortable, but his mind was filled with scattered, disordered thoughts, coming and going suddenly. Despite himself, his eyes were drawn towards the shoreline, searching for the familiar electric lights of his homeland, where he had grown up and matured. Though he was not crying, he suddenly felt a stinging sensation in his eyes, and something warm seemed to trickle down his cheeks. For more than 13 years, as a combat soldier across 4 military regions, Nguyen's sole duty had been to fly on missions. His life was very simple, trusting only in the present moment without worrying about what might happen tomorrow. Hence, tears rarely came to Nguyen as easily as they did now. He could not determine whether these tears were for his motherland, Vietnam, or from the shameful fate of a defeated soldier like him. In the distance, flickering lights appeared on the sea's surface, possibly from fishing boats gradually approaching the anchored ship. However, each time they got close, the U.S. ship would move further away. Later, Nguyen learned that the U.S. Navy feared Viet Cong commandos, so they only rescued people during the day. The cigarette pack from the afternoon was already more than half gone. Now it was late at night, and the cold was starting to set in. Nguyen returned to lie next to his children on the ship's floor, hoping to get some sleep that night. Nguyen's wife, perhaps uncomfortable with the unfamiliar place and filled with worries, woke up very early and urged Nguyen and the children to wake up. "Wake up, dear. It looks like they're preparing to transfer us to another ship." The sun had already risen above the water on the eastern shore. Thanks to the cool sea breeze and fresh air, along with a few nights of sleeplessness, Nguyen had a sound sleep as if he had taken a strong tonic, making him feel completely refreshed and alert. Everyone around was busy packing their belongings into suitcases, lining up to descend the rope ladder to board another boat. "Pack up our things so we can go with them." "What is there to pack? We threw everything into the sea yesterday afternoon." "That's fine. I'll carry Mika, you hold Mina, and Mickey can go with adopted sister Mai and her older brother Chow to the ladder." They called it a ladder out of formality, but it was actually a makeshift rope ladder, lowered from the ship for emergencies or rescue operations. The ladder was narrow, just wide enough for one person to climb. Any mistake or slip could easily result in a fall into the sea. After carefully instructing his wife on how to climb, Chow, Mai, and their eldest son Mickey quickly climbed down the ladder first. Nguyen had a bit of difficulty because his second son, a chubby 3-year-old, clung tightly to his chest, so Nguyen had to be very cautious, stepping down each rung carefully. Following Nguyen was his wife, holding their youngest daughter Mina, an 8-month-old who clung tightly to her mother as they carefully descended. Eventually, Nguyen's family, like the others, safely boarded the second ship. It was now noon on April 30th, 1975. Nguyen noticed a few Vietnamese generals sitting on the deck below in the ship's hold. These officers were still in full military uniform, complete with ranks on their shoulders and caps, surrounded by many of their guards. Nguyen overheard some unflattering comments from a few soldiers, standing nearby, about the behavior of one of the generals, who had a reputation for less than commendable deeds. Here, everyone was provided with military rations. The biggest hardship was for their youngest, Mina, who was still bottle feeding. However, finding milk on the ship was impossible, so her mother had to mix coffee creamer with sugar and cold water for her to drink. At first, Mina resisted, but when she got too hungry, she had to drink it. The few cans of Gigo milk they had saved for her had all sunk into the sea when they jumped onto the ship. The most selfish and despicable act Nam remembered was from a fellow Air Force member who also had a small child. His wife and he were lucky to have brought along more than half a dozen milk bottles. Nam's wife begged them to lend one, so she could mix the creamer for their daughter, as using a cup was messy and spilled everywhere. But the couple heartlessly refused, leaving the baby girl with no choice but to drink from the cup. Fortunately, with the help of heaven and earth, Mina only suffered mild diarrhea from the cream and sugar combination drink and did not fall seriously ill. More and more people crowded onto the ship, as many fishing boats fled from the coast. Many people had brought radios and were able to listen to Saigon radio, which reported that the Viet Cong had already entered the city and that the Republic of Vietnam's government, led by President Duong Van Minh, had surrendered. Nam observed that many helicopters from the Republic of Vietnam Air Force, as well as those from the American company Air America, were continuously flying out to the fleet. After landing, the pilots had to help push the helicopters off the deck to make room for others to land. It seemed that Nam's ship had been ordered to rescue refugees, so it kept circling around without moving further away. As night fell, more and more people were fleeing by boat. The rope ladders used to bring people aboard had been pulled up as the sun began to set, casting a grayish hue over the western coastline. Each time a boat approached, the ship would use its fire hoses to spray water, forcing them to stay away. The dim lantern lights on the boats flickered on and off with the waves, resembling fireflies in the night. The cries for help from women and the wails of children mixed with the sound of waves crashing against the ship created a terrifying and eerie atmosphere. Occasionally, some helicopters that took off late circled above, unable to find a landing spot on the ship, so they made ditch landings at sea. Others, suffering from low fuel, plunged headfirst into the water like moths drawn to a flame. Nam had no idea whether those unfortunate pilots survived or perished, as in the darkness, he did not see any life rafts being deployed to rescue them. When people are faced with desperation and extreme fear, they often become reckless and make daring decisions. Nam still remembered an incident in early April 1975. He was ordered to deliver emergency supplies to the Phan Rang Air Base. After dropping off the supplies, he brought the aircraft to the fuel depot to refuel before returning to Bien Hoa. As soon as the ramp was lowered, 4 soldiers guarding the fuel depot, armed with M16 rifles, jumped onto the aircraft. With bullets already chambered, they pointed their guns directly at the crew and ordered, "If you don't take us to Saigon, we'll shoot you." It should be noted that Con Hoa province and the city of Nha Trang had already fallen to the North Vietnamese army, leaving only Phan Rang and the airbase as the last defensive outpost. No one knew how much longer the base could hold out before it would be forced to make a tactical withdrawal, as President Nguyen Van Thu had ordered during the evacuation of Pleiku. Nam unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out of the cockpit. "What do you want?" "We want to go to Saigon." Nam looked them in the eyes and observed their gestures, noticing the overwhelming fear and anxiety etched on their faces. "Where's your commanding officer?" "He's already fled." Nam thought that refusing them would not help and might make the situation worse. "Okay, you can go, but we will have to get down to refuel first, or we won't make it to Saigon." The situation calmed down as the 4 men no longer pointed their guns at the crew. 2 of them jumped down to operate the fuel pump, while the other 2 remained on the aircraft to keep watch. About 10 minutes later, the aircraft was ready to take off, carrying 4 deserting soldiers. As soon as they passed over Ca Na at an altitude of about 5,000 feet, Nam radioed Bien Hoa to report the incident. When the aircraft landed, Military police were already waiting to greet the four men. Deep down, Nam did not harbor resentment towards those soldiers, because he was certain they had no intention of hijacking the aircraft or harming the crew. They were simply terrified of being abandoned. Just like their direct superiors who had fled first, leaving them behind, when the aircraft arrived, it was like a life-saving buoy that they had to grab at any cost to survive. This desperation led them to take such a reckless action. Nam had also heard about some of his fellow pilots flying F-5s to Thailand who, due to fuel shortages, were forced to land on highways or had to squeeze together two people on one seat in the cockpit. There were also stories of L-19 reconnaissance planes landing on aircraft carriers, and similar ditching incidents involving Hu-1 helicopters at night, which were understandable. After 2 days and nights, the ship had rescued a large number of people, mostly coastal residents and fishermen of various ages. The ship then began to leave its designated position, heading further out into international waters. More than a day later, the refugees were informed over the loudspeaker that they would be transferred to a larger, faster ship with a capacity of over 4,000 people. Upon hearing this, everyone cheered enthusiastically as if it were Tet, Lunar New Year. Nam's greatest hope was that they would have proper bottled milk for his daughter and water for bathing, because for many days since being rescued from the sea, Nam had only been able to rinse his mouth and bathe in the sea breeze. His body was on the verge of fermenting. It wasn't long before the refugee ship docked alongside a large cargo ship in Subic Bay, Philippines. A makeshift bridge was set up to connect the two ships. The refugees began to lead each other onto the larger ship, and Nam and his wife hurriedly carried their children, following the crowd, hoping to find a decent spot below deck for the children to lie down. He had no idea how long this journey would last or where it would take them. Everyone crowded together, descending into the ship's hold. Nam led his wife and children down the stairs as quickly as possible. Standing on the deck, his hopes faded as he saw the rusty, damp interior of the ship. The large hold was dimly lit by only a few weak light bulbs. People sat in long rows on relatively clean, dry spots. Nam felt like he was in a prison or in a scene from a movie where white people captured African slaves in the past to transport them for sale. The musty smell was overwhelming, and the scene of people jostling for space and arguing loudly was disheartening. Nam felt disappointed and dejected. The baby still didn't have milk, and many people nearby were moaning in sickness. He turned to his wife and whispered, "It's too dangerous down here, easy to catch diseases. Let's climb back up, the air is better, only worry if it rains." Nam's wife immediately agreed. "Let's go up then, we can use a towel to cover up if it rains." The whole family carried their belongings and climbed back up the stairs to the deck. The deck was also packed with people, and it was difficult to move. Fortunately, Nam found an empty corner just big enough for his family to sit down. There Nam reunited with Sergeant M and Sergeant C, whom he had lost contact with after jumping onto the ship. Since both were single and without families, they had moved quickly. They had hung hammocks nearby, giving Nam someone to talk to and pass the time with. "M, is there a place to bathe around here?" "Hey, the lieutenant colonel doesn't know? They're bathing out there like crazy." He pointed to the back of the ship. "Okay, I need to take a shower right away." Making his way to the back as directed, Nam saw about a dozen hoses pouring water down onto people scrubbing themselves below. Men, women, and children of all ages were bathing together, fully clothed, seemingly very comfortable. Without hesitation, Nam joined in, tilting his head back to sip some water and rinse his mouth. Immediately, he spat it out in discomfort, muttering to himself, "My God, what kind of water is this? So salty." A young man nearby who had probably made the same mistake laughed loudly. "Don't you know? Seawater is great for rinsing your mouth, no need for toothpaste." Since birth, Nam had never been on a ship like this. Nam still remembered that in 1969 the Air Force Command had sent him to the United States for training, learning to fly a new type of aircraft that the U.S. military was about to transfer to Vietnam. While at Fort Rucker, the training school had organized a deep-sea fishing trip in Miami, Florida, for Allied officers. Even on a fairly large ship, Nam had gotten seasick and vomited almost to the point of death, so he had disliked sea voyages ever since, even for pleasure. Thus, his experience with survival at sea was next to none. At first, Nam assumed that the seawater was filtered into fresh water for bathing or washing, but it turned out to be 100% pure seawater. He chuckled to himself and thought, bathing in seawater is refreshing and disinfectant. People even pay to go to Vung Tau or Nha Trang for a sea bath. Now that it's free, what am I complaining about? But the difference was that after a seawater bath, people could rinse off with fresh water, whereas after Nam bathed, he soon turned into a pickled radish. His hair, back, and armpits were all covered in glistening white salt, and even his private parts turned into a salty hot dog. Despite the blazing tropical sun, the fast-moving ship and the fresh sea air made Nam feel very comfortable. Large fish, whose names he didn't know, followed the ship's wake, creating a beautiful sight. Surrounded by nothing but the blue of the ocean, Nam felt as if he were flying, lost in some mysterious, boundless universe. This gentle, endearing sensation often came to him during very early flights. Before 1969, when Nam was still with the 215th Squadron stationed in Nha Trang, he often had to go on missions to Pleiku, Ban Mi Thuat, or Ki Nan, requiring the crew to take off very early to provide support to Allied forces. The weather in central Vietnam, in the 2nd Military Region, often had thick white clouds hanging low in the early morning, with cold, misty droplets forming heavy cloud clusters, covering the entire forested area ahead. The air outside was still cold, and the sky had not yet fully brightened. The cockpit windows were closed tightly. The sound of the jet engine mounted at the rear of the aircraft, and the whirling rotor blades had quieted down. Nam felt as light as a butterfly, silently gliding over the still-sleeping forests and nameless mountains and winding streams as slender as a woman's body. The scenery was pristine and magnificent, as if preparing to welcome the birth of a new day. In those transcendent moments, Nam often felt as if he were transcending this world, becoming a free-flying bird, seeking new and wondrous discoveries in nature. While still lost in his reverie, Nam was startled by a loud noise behind him. "Why don't you go get some canned food? They're handing it out over there." It turned out his wife had been waiting for him to bring food back and had come to remind him. "Okay, I'll go get it." A pathetic and cunning scene was unfolding before his eyes, as a group of people who had gone to get the food were unevenly distributing it among the refugees. Arguments and disputes ensued, because the person who went to get the food had hidden all the good, edible items for their family and friends, only sharing the less desirable items that few people wanted. Fortunately, no one had starved to death yet. Nam felt disheartened by the behavior of some people. After many years of colonization, first by the Chinese and then by the French, followed by the influence of the Americans under the guise of being allies, many Vietnamese people had lost the inherent virtues of their nation, learning instead to be deceitful and cunning. Proverbs like, "A drop of water reflects a whole river," "People of the same country should love each other," or "The healthy leaf covers the torn leaf," seemed at times to be mere words used to comfort those who had fallen on hard times. Some people could sell their conscience for just a few hundred dong, becoming paid slanderers for others, or for a few dozen dong, writing defamatory articles or attacking those with differing views. They would even go so far as to desecrate the dead. Nam felt disgusted when he heard people boastfully claim that they had studied at France or American schools, not Vietnamese ones, or that they had worked as servants for the French or Americans to appear more cultured and progressive. But when the country was in turmoil and needed them, these people proudly bragged that they had foreseen the situation and fled. Once in the West, in France or America, they rejoiced as if they had returned to their native homeland or their ancestral land. Poor motherland Vietnam, so kind and virtuous, yet burdened with such pretentiousness. After more than 2 days adrift at sea, everyone was talking, not knowing where the ship would take them. Nam was also completely in the dark, unable to determine their direction. He told himself, whatever, wherever it goes. He only hoped they would soon reach land so he could find fresh water to bathe, as the itching and discomfort had become unbearable. His hair was burnt, full of sea salt, and stood up like bamboo roots. However, he was fortunate that neither his wife nor his children had fallen ill. After lunch, Nam was sitting with his eyes closed, leaning against the steel wall, trying to take a nap. Suddenly, Sergeant C woke him up. We hope you enjoyed the excerpt from this chapter. The complete audiobook of The Last Flight Out by Nguyen Van Ba can be purchased on platforms like Google Play and others. Please subscribe to this channel for more content like this.